Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to the A24 project here on the Nerd Party, the only podcast that goes through the entire back catalogue, reviews the new releases, and chats to the talent in front of and behind the camera of A24. On today's show, it's raining men. Hallelujah, it's raining men. Not all men, but two men review A24 and Alex Garland's latest, Men. I'm Dallas King, and with me as always is the Tory Airbnb owner, the creepy priest, the green man, and the scary child to my protagonist. It's Lee Hutchison. How are you?
I'll do my best to do my best. What was it, Tim Nice but Dim impression for this whole episode? Yeah, I'm good. How are you?
I'm very, very good. Quite the film to to discuss today. Fair warning to anyone who's not seen Men yet, there will be a spoiler section because the ending needs to be discussed in quite a lot of detail, I think. So if you haven't seen Men yet, press pause, go watch it and come back. But we'll give you another spoiler warning when we get into it. Before we dive into the film, of course, let's take a quick look at the latest A24 hour news. We like to bring you, just a few tidbits that you maybe, as fans of A24, have possibly missed. We're sure you're all on Twitter, but, there might be a few that you've missed. So the big topic for this episode is the Cannes Film Festival. A total of 5 4 A24 films, 5 technically if you included a special screening of Men, played across the festival. The Stars at Noon, Showing Up, God's Creatures, and Funny Pages. Of these, only one was in the competition, but despite some rather negative reviews, Claire Denis' The Stars at Noon won the Grand Prix, which is essentially second prize, but actually shared it with Lucas Dant's Close, which A24 acquired, along with the Scottish breakout hit After Sun by Charlotte Wells. So Lee, what did you make of A24's festival? Pipped again for the Palme d'Or by Neon, 3 palms in a row. Are A24 in danger of losing ground to Neon here as the top American indie distributor?
Well, yeah, there is that potential. I suppose they are the kind of the closest rival at the moment, and Neon are certainly doing the business when it comes to award seasons as well. So yeah, I think that could be a fair point. I think in terms of if you went to anyone perhaps in the street and went, can you name a Neon film? Perhaps it wouldn't be, easily done. So I guess that it's going in its favour. But yeah, I think I didn't follow it too closely, the kind of Cannes Film Festival, because I'm kind of hoping with the Edinburgh Film Festival, with its new date in August, we'll maybe scoop up a couple of these films. So I'm trying to go in as kind of blind as possible at this stage. But yeah, it was impossible not to see some of the negative reaction to Claire Denis' new film, and even people trying to claim that she should retire, which I think was pretty poor taste. Yeah. So yeah, I'm keen to see her latest film. How does she follow up the Fuck Box? I'm definitely curious to see.
Well, I think if anything, I didn't really read any of the reviews. Like you, I want to go in as blind as possible. But I think we need to have we need to call time clearly on A24. Recasting Robert Pattinson due to unavailability with Joe Alwyn. I think there seems to be a common thread coming through in his performances, perhaps. But I guess we will leave judgment until it comes out. Yeah, like you, I think there's definitely a strong chance that After Sun will probably be the opening and closing film of Edinburgh Film Festival. I think that's a definite, and we'll have to see what else manages to pop up along the way. In terms of casting news for other films, Wizards, David the Rover Michaud's film, co-written by Owen Lars himself, Joel Edgerton, is going to be about 2 hapless pothead beach bar owners who run into trouble when they stumble across stolen loot that they should have left alone. To me, that sounds a bit like a stoner version of No Country for Old Men, but casting-wise, it is going to have Pete Davidson, Naomi Scott, and Orlando Bloom has just signed up. Are you looking forward to this one?
I am, yeah. There was a film, it blows my mind. I think it came out almost like 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know if you saw this one at the Edinburgh Film Festival, but it's called like Romans, and like Orlando Bloom was in it, and he plays this sort of like demolition expert that kind of is tearing down this church, but actually, he was a previous victim of like sexual assault, and it was a really powerful and strong performance from Orlando Bloom, and it was a film that never seemed to get much traction, and it would kind of made me reevaluate his sort of career and levels at the time. And I'm keen to kind of now see more of his films. Like, it felt like a film that was completely overlooked, but hopefully people that are out there in the casting world have seen that and are keen to kind of put him in films. So I'm looking forward to seeing him in a quote unquote big release again. I still don't quite get the whole Pete Davidson thing. Maybe like I still have to get around to watching The King of Staten Island and obviously Bodies coming up, but I don't really get the whole thing surrounding him, so I remain to be convinced about him. But yeah, I'm certainly interested.
Yeah, no, I've been meaning to catch King of Staten Island. I think it's on Netflix now, so maybe this Jubilee weekend I'll give it a whirl. But yeah, no, from what I've seen, certainly like his brief appearance in the Suicide Squad. The Suicide Squad. Yeah, I'm not holding it too much up. But yeah, Orlando Bloom, I think, yeah, I rewatched. I was in Glasgow the other week and in my hotel, and Two Towers was on. And I mean, yeah, still a cracking film. He was great in it. I think, yeah, he's struggled sometimes to find the right sort of vehicles for him since then. And, I think if they maybe give him like the sort of quirky, weird, eccentric sort of villain type role, I think that's maybe something he could really sort of excel in. I think, to go against type or something. So, yeah, we'll have to see what happens with that one. And the final bit of news is, Lee, last time we were on the podcast, I talked about signing up to the AAA 24, secret club. At the time, you hadn't, but it seems you changed your mind since the last episode. Did I manage to sell it on?
Well, I was going to buy the fanzine for Everything Everywhere All at Once anyway, so I thought, you know what, I'll make the effort and for an extra couple of bucks and give it a go. And yeah, I've certainly seen some interesting kind of perks that have kind of popped up that they didn't necessarily kind of advertise, which are quite handy. That I know last month they did like a 30% discount on their books, which was quite handy for me as I quite like collecting their coffee table books. I put in an order and I was nearly tempted to go back in again. I think they announced like the Lobster screenplay book on the last day of the discount, and I was like, oh, tempted, but no, it was just when they took into account all of the extra costs.
It's that shipping, that's what gets you.
It's the shipping and the taxes and so on, and yeah, so I made a pass on that one. But I've got a couple of books coming in the post. I've ordered the casting one, which is the type of thing I'm really into, and what else do I get? Oh, the Come On art book, which is a bit smaller, so it felt like it wasn't going to be too heavy, so I've gone for those two.
Excellent. And yeah, I mean, I was actually quite surprised at the level of offer that they did. It looks like we'll probably get like about a monthly email with offers in. So like you say, there was 30% off screenplays, which, if you're in America, a fantastic deal because the shipping will be much less. International members, maybe not so much because that's how they get you. But I am very tempted to get. I'm a sucker for an exclusive bit of merch. So there's a hat, which I probably will end up buying at some point. But in terms of your membership package, which was the Everything Everywhere All at Once zine and your membership card and pin badge, I have to say I was not slightly. I was actually quite disappointed in the membership card itself, in that it was a plastic card, but it was basically, there was nothing to distinguish yourself as a member. It was like, you've got the card, but there were no details. There was no name or membership number. It was just the standard card being given to everyone. And I thought, given the price, I would have expected something, slightly more personalized, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. I mean, I just chucked mine. I think it's maybe in the back of my wallet at the moment. I don't think I ever have any excuse to get it out or need it. But I did notice an interesting perk where it just seemed completely random, where I think they have this like Instagram close people account, and like they put up a lot of their like offers and like giveaways, etc. through there. And it was like, there was one of like, if people are in the south of France, you have a chance to meet Kelly Reichardt, at like a Cannes event. And it was just like, oh, fair play, that is a pretty good offer. Very specific to that location. But, it fair enough. It seems kind of a good incentive and so on. So, they should have chucked that in as well. Like, you get your unpersonalized card, but you can go hang out in Cannes with Kelly Reichardt if you'd like.
I think I need to check up on that, because I've so far not seen any of the close friends posts. So I'll need to double check that they have my Instagram details correctly. But perhaps, if one of their releases comes to Edinburgh Film Festival, will we get to go to a special, close ranks event? We'll have to see. We'll have to see. So, but enough about our memberships. Time to dive into the main release. A film which described by Robbie Collin as if Lars von Trier directed an episode of The League of Gentlemen, Men is written and directed by Alex Garland. This is his third feature after Ex Machina and Annihilation, but he has also written Sunshine, Dread, 28 Days Later, and The Beach. In Men, a woman goes on a solo vacation to the English countryside following the death of her husband. There she finds herself tormented and terrorized by a number of men, all of whom share a similar appearance. So, Lee, are you a fan of Alex Garland's work? What were your expectations going into this one?
Yeah, I'd go even further back than some of the stuff that you mentioned. He first came to kind of mind sort of that, like maybe 2001 with The Beach. That was the type of film where I think I was maybe about 13, 14 at the time. So even though kind of with adult eyes, there's definitely a lot wrong with the film. At that sort of age, it was like this really kind of good gateway film. And yeah, I've always been annoyed by the ending and not the the alternative ending that's on the DVD to age myself and what they went with in the book. But, Alex Garland, that was kind of the first time I became kind of aware of them. And, his sort of relationship with sort of Danny Boyle that kind of followed into him working on like 28 Days Later, Sunshine, and such like. I followed it through, and I don't think he's done any kind of bad films to date. He's worked in a kind of variety of ways. He's graduated to becoming a filmmaker. I think he even did uncredited direction work on Dread, which I think people have tried to reevaluate recently. But no, I thought Dread was great. He's got, we'll talk about it, I'm sure, but he's going to have another film coming up with A24 on the horizon in the form of Civil War. So, he's clearly a filmmaker and talent they recognise. In terms of the film, I was kind of looking forward to it. Like, I think I'd seen that teaser trailer where she does the echo down the sort of the railway bridge a couple of times. My excitement levels was slightly killed, though, in a week or two kind of building up to the film, where I had avoided the main trailer for the film. I didn't want to know any more than sort of what had been teased, and I remember being slightly surprised by that all the characters pretty much look like Rory Kinnear, and I think I would have enjoyed that sort of surprise and revelation in the cinema a lot more. I was kind of at the beginning of the film expecting that to come at some point and being like, oh, that would have been a nice, neat trick in the cinema. So I felt like that had been taken away from me a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Less is always more when it comes to A24 teaser trailers. For me, huge fan of Alex Garland. In terms of his work with Danny Boyle, 28 Days Later, fantastic. Yeah, like you, I think, The Beach was sort of one of those ones where, just after the sort of train spotting thing, this was his next one. Famously, the film, he had a massive falling out with Ewan McGregor on because Ewan McGregor was pretty much essentially promised the lead role, but then, Hollywood stepped in and said, no, we want Leo, so that's what happened. But it's still a good film. Like you, I do prefer the alternate, slightly more nihilistic ending. Ex Machina, obviously, A24 project. We have an entire episode on that. You can go back and listen to that. But really sort of showcased his talent. And sort of it felt like he'd been directed for years up for that one. Annihilation, I just loved Annihilation. I think it was my favourite film, which I saw in 2018. Sadly, didn't get the big release over, certainly in the UK, that it deserved. I think Paramount basically made it. It was just a bit too bizarre for them. But I really appreciated what he was doing in there. Obviously, he off the back of that, I think he took a bit of a hit and was maybe sort of struggling, thinking, is directing for me? But clearly, sort of working with sort of A24 and stuff like that, he's found his groove again. I think he's going to be around as a directorial talent for a long time. Didn't know too much about it. Obviously, it felt there was going to be some sort of horror elements to it. Jessie Buckley, easily the best actress to have come out of a BBC West End talent show. She's coming off the back of stuff like the Charlie Kaufman film, The Lost Daughter, and everything like that. So exceptional talent. Great to see what she was going to be doing in this. Obviously, this film is coming at quite an interesting time, I think. Um, it's interesting that the film, given what it is, was released coincidentally, perhaps, on the same day as the result on the infamous trial that was happening in America at the same time. So, I mean, we can dive into, I guess, some of the themes of the film and what they take it. So, like I said, she's trying to recover from the death of her husband. We get a few flashbacks here and there. It seems that, they were desperately unhappy as a couple. She was wanting a divorce. He was refusing that, threatening to commit suicide if she did leave him. They get into a bit of an argument, and then she sees him fall to his death. I mean, what did you make of that central relationship, which kind of drives a lot of her emotional state in this? Some people could potentially argue that she was hit by him. He was physically abusive, potentially emotionally manipulative as well. I'm sure some people will argue that there was probably some element on both sides of emotional abuse and stuff like that. What did you think of the relationship which drives the sort of the story along?
Yeah, it's one of those ones. It's slightly tricky to talk about it almost without diving into the final end. So I'll do my best to be as cryptic as I can at this point, and then sort of like dive into it probably a little bit later on. But yeah, I was kind of first blown away by thinking, oh, that's just across the river from my office in London. I wonder if I have to put that on my little tour of movie locations next time I'm down there, was my first little thought as I watched that scene. But it certainly starts kind of quite off early, sort of the, we'll see as a theme later on in the film, where the amount of people that hide behind their abuse, emotional abuse, by just saying it came from a place of love, or they just wanted to be loved. And I think that was the case there, not taking any responsibility for one's actions, even going as far to say, well, I'm going to commit suicide and it's going to be all your fault, is probably one of the most horrific things that you can put on someone. And I think you're 100% correct in that this film has landed at a very interesting time in terms of what we've seen in the past few days in terms of the Depp Heard case, but I almost kind of take a step back further going, you could probably drop this film at any time in the past years, weeks, months, and the reality is it would be kind of as relevant as ever. But it's just hard not to draw some parallels between the two just now. And the amount of times that you think of the term crime of passion, again, it all comes from really places where it's like, I hated the person when I hit them, it's just I loved them too much, etc. And that was very much the case here, and something all too common, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you had this when you saw the teaser trailer or the main trailer at the cinema, but I certainly noticed it a couple of times when seeing it, in that you get the full trailer, and then when the title came up at the end of Men, there was a few sort of laughs or scoffs of like, of course. And that, the film's title essentially is trying to encapsulate the main problem in her life, men. And as we've sort of talked about, apart from her husband at the beginning, every man that she meets within this village is played by Rory Kinnear. The first one that we get is Jeffrey, the owner of the house that she's staying in for a couple of weeks. Very sort of middle class English. He reminded me of is it Dom from Gogglebox? He just seems like that type of person. Seemingly quite, a nice chap, a bit socially awkward, but not a bad man, as well, certainly compared to some of the other ones initially. Anyway, I mean, what did you make of Jeffrey to begin with?
Yeah, as I mentioned at the start of the show, he reminded me of like Tim Nice but Dim from like the Harry Enfield show back in the day. That it was impossible not to take from this film. Like, there are many themes, some subtle, some far from subtle. Where it was like, you watch this film and you're like, so it comes out at the weekend of the Platinum Jubilee that brings out some of the worst in English people, and you're watching it going, yep, I'm very much getting the impression that I should avoid Middle England as much as possible this weekend, and from men. You know, we've probably all seen his type before. You know, they're all too common on the TV at the moment with their thoughts on the Jubilee and maybe local parties in sort of small English towns. You know, yeah, he is 100% guy. You know, nice enough guy, but you know, you just sit there thinking, you know, if you got him onto probably a topic of the day on terms of maybe sort of like, you know, women's rights, or, you know, the day's news about sort of immigration or such, like, you would probably just be like, I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to just try and just be as nice as possible and just get away from this situation. You know, you don't want to scratch that one too much.
Oh, yes. No, he is definitely the type of person who would have voted for Brexit, but then in the same breath would have complained about the fact that he can't get anyone to tend his garden and stuff like that, you know. So, yeah, no, he's. I think it's an interesting start to the film. You know, at one point I was wondering, is this a film critical of men or the horrors of Airbnb bookings? I don't know, because you know he takes everyone around, and then you know you've got I think the bit that's in one of the trailers about the apple from the garden. Oh no, forbidden fruit. You know, so there's quite a few biblical references in the film. You know, is she, you know, Eve, obviously, you know, everything was perfect in the Garden of Eden, and then it was all screwed up by a woman eating an apple when she shouldn't have, you know. It's all women's fault, you know, that's the problem. What I did like about the start of the film, which leads into not the final, I'd say probably sort of second act thing, was, and for me, one of the best bits of the film, which was the home invasion sort of style aspect of it. It's like a set piece where, you know, a lot of the men are attacking this house trying to get in. And I think what worked really well was because at the start, Jeffrey is giving this tour of the Airbnb, which you would do, you know, if someone was coming to your house, you would give them the tour, show them where everything is. But what that does, it allows the audience to see the layout of the house, entry, exit points, areas where potential danger can come from. And I think because we've got that knowledge of the house there, it then lends into the tension being built in the second act as well. And you know, so she starts enjoying her time in the village. You know, her phone goes a bit mad at one point, but she's just sort of walking around, enjoying the place. Goes along an old railway line, finds a tunnel, does this little vocal thing, which then seems to alert the attention of her to a man who chases her. And then later on in the woods, she takes a photo of this old abandoned house and sees a naked man in the photo. So she goes back to her house, and then, you know, he starts wandering around the garden. He's then arrested by the police, also once again played by Rory Kinnear, and you know, it's never explained, and certainly the character of Harper never seems to recognize that all these men are looking very similar. I mean, like you said there, you know, there are some references which are subtle. There are some that are unsubtle. I mean, something like this always reminds me of the quote from Garth Marenghi of I know writers who use subtext and they are cowards. I mean, like you say, you would have preferred to potentially discover this sort of multiple casting aspect upon your initial viewing. But what did you make of that decision and of Rory's 7 different performances, I think I counted?
Yeah, I love Rory Kinnear. Obviously, I'm a James Bond fan, so I always think he's like, I always want more of Tanner. I want more Rory Kinnear, but you know,
You've got it. You've got all of it.
Yeah, I've seen him on stage. I've really enjoyed him, and you know, my favorite Black Mirror episode is the one where he plays the lead in a movie that I think, like, you could almost make a version
strangely
of Men.
Prescient.
Yeah, you can make a version of Men that would probably be a really good Black Mirror episode as well. But you know, I really liked him. You know, as I say, if you've wanted more Rory Kinnear, this film delivers, and you know, he plays all of the performances really well. Some get a bit more screen time than others. I thought his version of the kind of the priest or the local vicar was particularly, you know, it was incredibly strong. And yeah, I think there's an element where when you kind of watch the trailer and you're going in, you almost think like the fact that Rory Kinnear is all of these characters is going to be a thing, or it's going to be acknowledged, but they don't do that, which I quite like, because well, there's no need to, really. You can draw your own connotations from it. And I was watching an interview with Alex Garland, and I think it sums up a lot of his work, is sometimes you just put something onto the screen and you just lean into it. Just let the audience do their own thing with it. Don't acknowledge it. Don't feel that you've got to make it something more than it is. Just let them lean into it. And I think that works really well with the kind of the Rory Kinnear kind of plot. And there's a lot of things that you can add on to it. As you mentioned, sort of these gammon-like men. They're all similar variations of the type. Remember there was that meme that kicked around a little while ago where it was like all of these people from sort of like that voted for Brexit, for example, or all of the like local Tory MPs, or all of the Republicans, etc. You put all of their faces on top of each other, and it all kind of ultimately ends up looking a lot alike. Or there's that meme of like Question Time, the type of like white older man that gets really annoyed and points. Like that is like essentially the Rory Kinnear kind of character in this movie. And that was sort of my takeaway, that all of these men, they're not too far off dissimilar from each other, and probably a sort of very small town, perhaps a very, very small gene pool as well.
I never thought of the of that aspect of it. I mean, I'm looking forward to the multiple internet articles on various certain film websites, which will be every Rory Kinnear performance in men ranked.
Get pitching on that now, Dallas.
I probably should, yeah. Mulleted man, near the bottom, I think. But I mean, it is a concept which, Natasha Lyonne from Russian Doll, what a concept. But it is a concept which could have gone incredibly wrong. But it actually does work, and I think it works because of the strength of Rory Kinnear's performance. I think he is fantastic, and every single character is, while they all look like him, they are different enough. Jeffrey is very different from, I think Jeffrey is one of my favourites, but also, like you see, I think the vicar is an incredibly strong performance. Obviously, we've got this sort of 11, 12-year-old boy with Rory Kinnear's face kind of CGI'd on him to make him look young. Again, that could have gone incredibly wrong, but it does kind of work within the context of the film, and I think it's great. Obviously, there's a few sort of folk horror references sort of dotted about as to potential hints as to why it's happening. But for me, I think it's ultimately this is all coming from Harper's own conscious or subconscious, one of the two, and that she has been essentially sort of emotionally destroyed by one particular man, and now her opinion of all men has now been tainted, that she cannot differentiate, essentially. She will always be mistrusting and fearful of men, and that is why they all ultimately sort of blend into one particular one. I think that's my reading of it. Did you have a similar reading, or was it anything else for you on that aspect?
No, I think that makes kind of sense. Yeah, as I mentioned sort of earlier, I kind of feel sort of like, logistically, like there's definitely quite a lot of takes that you can take on this choice, and I think each of them are equally valid. For me, yeah, it's definitely that sort of like, yeah, all men sort of, and it's just, yeah, it's almost the unsubtle version of, yeah, all men. So yeah, of course they kind of look a little bit alike from birth until death, I guess.
And yeah, we will just discuss that in a little bit, quite literally. But for yourself, I mean, were there any particular sort of the different styles of filmmaking that you brought in? There's, we've got typical sort of home invasion thriller, you've got sort of folk horror elements, you've got this emotional drama. What sort of aspect of the film sort of really sort of stood out for you is your favourite?
I think it's very much kind of the direction of like the performances for me, that with the, as you kind of touched on, the home invasion, sort of some of the references to kind of folk horror, they were things I'd sort of seen before and so on. But with in terms of Jessie Buckley, in terms of how she was kind of probably directed and the performance and how it was written, there's not much really on the page for her to kind of do and respond to, and there's the performance that we probably typically expect.
Acting is reacting, and she has to react quite a lot.
Exactly, and that's it. It's just there's times that she reacts to things, but then there's time that she equally just goes. She doesn't react. She can be quite a calm presence towards things. So I think for Alex Garland, like, he's taken that approach of like, for maybe better or worse, he's really stripped back Harper to kind of a very kind of thin kind of character, and a lot of it is down to sort of how she responds to this situation she finds herself in, and almost making the decisions to avoid a lot of the cliches that we'd expect with films like this. There are one or two, for example. I think the one I wasn't particularly fond of was sort of the scene where she's on the voice call to her friend, for example, and she's showing around the house, and we see the naked stalker just sort of outside, and we're just kind of building up to like, oh, he's going to see her, she's going to see her at one point, and they kind of don't lean into that. But I've seen that thing sort of done quite a few times, in a film where there's a lot of things that are done for the first time. That was sort of, I'd already seen that and kind of would have maybe preferred something a little bit different. But how he kind of approached this kind of character, I was really fascinated by.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the cliches, which I'm glad they did kind of sort of confront at one point, was why is she actually staying here? Why isn't she just getting in a car and leaving? Which they do address at one point, which was good, because I think anyone sort of with an ounce of sort of common sense at that point is going, she should probably just leave then. But they do address that. But I mean, do you think Garland actually maybe specifically sort of almost underwrote her character in that, we don't really get much, there's a couple of hints, there's like a call she makes to do with work and stuff, but like you say, there's not much on the page to Harper as a character. Do you think that then allows the audience to put more of themselves into her, and bringing like their own experiences of and stuff like that, and then it will shape sort of how they view her, and then how they would react in a similar situation if they were in a situation where they were being traumatized by 7 different versions of Awakening.
I think it always depends on how people want to spin things. Like, I think Harper could have been developed more, and I'm not saying that necessarily to kind of add more to sort of her backstory that could have been a bit overkill, etc. But I just felt sort of like, with this kind of character in particular, it was very thin, and I'm able to project a bit more onto that character. She become our vessel for maybe some of the audience members to go, oh, I've been in this situation before, and almost it's just, we spoke about reactions there. Sometimes ultimately this behavior of men and kind of what she kind of experiences is like things that she will have experienced numerous times and over again in her life, and it's almost not shocking for her to be honest, in some points. So there is an element of it that where, yeah, I think there's definitely two ways that can be spun about sort of this character, I think.
Yeah, and she is certainly put through the mill. She's sort of gaslit by several men. She's had this encounter at the house. She goes to the pub, and everyone sort of treats her like, oh no, calm down, dear, it's all going to be fine. And then she goes back to the house. We have this home invasion, which for me is probably the strongest directed segment. It's very tense, and you don't know exactly what's going on, and I think it's well done. And then we get to the final act, and this is where we're going to go into spoilers. Not essentially for the outcome of what happens, but I think it's in the manner in which I think it's safe to say that they've had elements of folk horror, just home invasion, thriller, this kind of thing, but it's fair to say that the tone shifts quite dramatically in the final act, and we're going to discuss that in spoilers. So if you haven't seen it again, just press pause and then come back when you have. Great. So it all goes a bit body horror-y, doesn't it? There wasn't certainly the trailers didn't hint at anything sort of like that. Obviously, there's a rather disgusting, gruesome scene, which I've seen a lot of horror films, but it really made me wince. Where the naked man has put his arm through the letterbox, and Harper stabs him in the hand, and then he pulls his arm out of the letterbox, basically cutting his arm in two, and then adding more into the theories of what's going on. Every single male character from that point on has an arm which is cut in two, and from that point on, it just all goes like a bit WTF, in the parlance of the kids these days. What did you make of this rather dramatic shift in tone, and how do you think Garland handled the horror aspect of that?
Well, I suppose it's almost one of those ones. Like I feel for people that are reviewing this film, that are doing publications, etc. Because
yeah, I did. It's like, how do you review this film without talking about that? It almost feels like almost half a review, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's one of these things. Like, I've only seen the film once, and I'd be certainly keen to see it again. But I suppose this is where it all kind of comes together to an extent. We have, by and large, a pretty kind of thin plot real until sort of this last 20 minutes, sort of half an hour of the kind of the home invasion, and sort of, I suppose, the themes of the movie all kind of coming together. And again, it's not necessarily the most subtle thing in the world, but it is sort of quite shocking and quite interesting. I think it's again, it's one of these ones that goes back to what Garland wants in his films, of like, you just lean into them, and you have to in this film. And I think you kind of start to watch all this kind of violence kind of coming in, and it's impossible not to sort of see how it all kind of comes together, this like cycle of sort of this toxic masculinity, and it becomes sort of passed down from generation to generation. The grievances that each generation almost has towards kind of women and their role and their place, it all kind of begins to kind of play out here. And you spoke about it at the top, in probably one of the most unsubtle parts, this apple tree, and she bites into it at the beginning of the film to kick things off. And it's this, what do they call it, like the original sin that sort of women have carried, but perhaps it's actually this actual violence, anger, aggression that has been passed through male generations, that it's actually us that perhaps have this original sin as opposed to women. And that almost starts to feel like it comes full circle in this film.
Yeah, so we're not going to skirt about it. We're going to discuss what happens. At one point, Harper feels like she's managed to successfully stave off the home invasion. She's managed to get them all out of her house, and then the naked man, I think he's called the Green Man. There's allusions to sort of this folk horror image of the Green Man. He's putting sort of like leaves and twigs and stuff in his head. He's sort of evolving into some sort of half man, half woodland creature, which is also kind of featured in his previous film Annihilation, a film which also had a rather polarizing ending as well. And we see him sort of come back into the garden. He's got his arm is split in two. He's got a broken ankle, and his belly is distended. He then gets on the ground, and essentially from an orifice, I'm not sure if it was his butthole or if it was a male vagina, but he gives birth to another one of the creatures. I think is it the boy first, and then the boy then gives birth to the priest, who then falls over, and then emerging in an Alien Covenant style from his back emerges Jeffrey, and then finally through Jeffrey's mouth emerges the feet of what turns out to be her, I guess, ex-husband, because he's deceased. And this is, like, when I saw it, I mean, I could feel the audience uncomfortably shifting in their seats and sort of nervous, sort of giggling at one point, and just sort of bafflement as to what the is going on here. Like you say, it could be, it's, incredibly gross out body horror. It reminded me of sort of an amazing sort of horror film from I think about 1990 called Society. This was however, all done essentially with CGI. Would they have tried to do this with practical effects back in the day? Who knows? Would they have been able to? I don't know. Perhaps it wouldn't maybe have looked as good. Who knows? But yeah, this was quite the shocking image to see. I think, like you say, I think it's shocking to look at, but I think it's quite an unsubtle sort of reference. I think it's basically sort of saying that there is this pattern, this sort of endless like cycle of violence and death. She may be able to escape one man, but basically she will never be able to escape all men in inverted commas and stuff like that. It is destined to repeat itself. Anything, and I guess we have maybe seen it with this herd dip thing there. Then perhaps nothing will ever change. You may be able to solve one problem, but society and men are potentially never going to change. There will always be this cycle that is as unable to escape. I mean, what did you make of it?
Yeah, I think what was interesting it was almost, you kind of talk about the audience reactions there, and it's almost similar to Harper, that she's watching this and it's like, what the hell is this? And it just then, as it kind of goes on, she almost kind of becomes kind of accepting of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, numb to it.
It's the first time men and Scottish running will ever kind of cross paths. But I was listening to this podcast, which is all about sort of like ultra running in Scotland. And they were talking to a woman, and she was like, and they asked her, there's been a huge amount of like women that are like producing incredible times in ultra running just now. So ultra running is anything over like 26 miles, anything over a marathon. And they were talking about sort of like one of these West Highland Way races, and why are so many women doing incredibly well at an ultra race, ultra races compared to kind of previous years. And she said simply things like, women have a lot more fat to burn, which helps. And then she went, and there's also a very strong theory that for women, that what we kind of find is that they've been through so much pain that when the pain and the suffering that comes with an ultra run, an ultra run, you could be spending almost like an entire day, significant amounts of hours just running over terrain, the mental hurdles. Like they go, we experience pain on a monthly level for several days at a time, childbirth, so many elements for certain women, it becomes ingrained. And then when things like this happen, it gives them a sense of like power over kind of something that's essentially like this, where it's like, oh, I've gone through kind of pain, and like looking at this kind of character kind of constantly giving birth and going through the cycle isn't too shocking. It can, and the pain isn't as bad for a woman going through that. And I think that almost kind of does tie into her sort of like very casual response to what's kind of going on at this stage. She was like, oh yeah, that kind of happens to women. I've seen that happen. I've experienced that kind of pain. I can handle something like this. That was kind of certainly my kind of take to an extent.
That's a very interesting point. Yeah, no, I mean, she does definitely seem numb to it. But one of the other reactions I find quite interesting is the facial expressions of the men while this was happening to them. There was almost a sort of look of, I mean, obviously there was a look of shock and pain on their faces, but there was also a look towards Harper like, this is actually your fault that this is happening. You are doing this to us, which again sort of leads into the sort of emotional manipulation side of things with that. And it is just, the other film, apart from Society, that kind of reminded me of, I mentioned with Alien Covenant, was Alien, where obviously the chest burster sequence and, the whole alien gestation cycle was a sort of allegory for male fear of childbirth. The man is essentially raped and impregnated by this facehugger alien, and then gives birth and dies as it bursts through its chest. And this is what happens here. Each previous version of the man is killed, giving birth to a new version of a man as well. And yeah, it's just an incredibly sort of shocking, twisted sequence. And yeah, given everything that had come before, it is quite a leap for it to do this. But I mean, it certainly clearly has had, I think, the intended effect. I think from Alex Garland, I don't think there's anyone who can come away from this film and not have opinions on it. I think it's the type of film which will undoubtedly have a lot of debate around it. What did it all mean? What did you make of the ending? I think that kind of film, which just from seeing the reviews, there are a lot of 4 or 5 star reviews. There's quite a few sort of 1 and 2 star reviews. It's an incredibly divisive film. At the moment, I'm actually sitting around the 3 star mark. I did admire a lot about to it, but other bits didn't really work for me. But I think any film which can create that sort of discussion is much better than just it was all right. I think there's going to be a lot of think pieces written about this film as well. But in terms of sort of continuing the sort of spoiler sort of circle that we've got going on, in the final moments, she is visited by a previous version of her ex-husband. They sort of both sit down at the couch. There's potential moment for reconciliation. She just sort of basically tiredly asks, "What do you want?" And I think he responds with something like, "Your love," or "I just want you to love me." And she's holding an axe at that point. I mean, what do you think happens at that point?
You know what? I don't actually know. I truly don't know.
That's quite all right.
I was sat there kind of watching it, and then I suppose I was kind of whiplashed by the fact that it has a sort of post-title sequence that, that has that moment, and then Flash Man, and then we sort of see her sitting in the garden looking kind of happy and thing, and that sort of threw me off a little bit and so on. And I mean, yeah, as I kind of mentioned earlier, just the amount of, rightly or wrongly, I think it can be taken in sort of 2 ways, that, the amount of abuse that comes off the back of like people looking to, saying it comes from a place of love, and I wouldn't have done this shocking behavior if I didn't love you, and the amount of excuses people make for things like that. We sort of see that kind of brought to kind of to full circle really in the final, the penultimate scene. But then equally, there's also, it ties in sort of very, again, male generational things about like, you think of the meme of like men would do blank instead of going to therapy, for example, and
men would literally give birth to multiple versions of themselves than rather to go to therapy.
Yeah, exactly. And the amount of sort of like, you see here that sort of, it's not just men inflicting, horror and shock upon women. We look at it like 2 of them are like a vicar and a police person. You think of, again, in this current climate, what the church and state are doing to women. And again, you can drop it this year and it's like, oh, it reminds you of Sarah Aberdeen or what's going on with abortion rights in America. But then drop it 2 years ago, it's something else. 5 years ago, 50 years ago, these things are constant. But there's little hints again that sort of like men are damaging other men. I think of at one point, and I still had a bit of sympathy for poor Jeffrey, where he was like, "Oh, you have all the qualities of a failed military man," and you think he's like saying it to Harper, and it was like, "Oh no, that's what my dad said to me when I was just 7 years old." And it's like, he's clearly been scarred and damaged by something like this. And again, you have a kind of character at the end, and perhaps the husband hadn't received much love in his life, and that's had knock-on effects. But it's all a very big cyclical cycle.
All comes back to childhood, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And that was where my head was sort of at. Like, I never thought of like, oh, what happened next? I was sort of still kind of in that moment at the time of thinking, oh, that is an interesting point. Yeah, again, maybe not the most subtle of points, but that is a strong point and very relevant.
Yeah, because it sort of ends where, she's just sitting there with her husband. It cuts to the credits. But then, yeah, we do jump back almost immediately after the title of Men, and she was sitting there in the garden, but her best friend has arrived to take her home, and we see a sort of bloody trail leading into the house. The car has crashed. So it indicates that it's not all in her head, which having experienced the trauma of witnessing, your husband kill himself and finding his body in a rather horrid way, all the injuries of him after falling to his death. Again, it's in the flashbacks. It's kind of admitted. It's kind of sort of said that it wasn't suicide. Maybe he was trying to climb down into the apartment again, and he fell. So did she kill someone? And if so, who was it? Did she kill Jeffrey? You think Jeffrey's potentially butchered in his own Airbnb? I mean, she'd get a 1-star rating as a customer, I'm pretty sure, off the basis of that. I think the look on her face and how happy she was at the end suggests some sort of catharsis, in that I think that she's worked things through in her mind, but I think that she's killed Jeffrey or someone who was coming into her house. But the way that it's kind of shot, almost, I think perhaps it's, well, actually I'm assuming it's a deliberate thing on Alex Garland's part, because otherwise why would it be in there, in that she is potentially slightly mentally unbalanced, and therefore she's taken her revenge on men, and actually all of this was actually her fault. She's the bad person. And it wasn't all men. It was this woman who's basically gone and destroyed men and stuff like that. So again, leaning into potentially the Eve aspect, it was all woman's fault. So I think there's potentially a reading in that, but I'm sure people will come and shout at me on social media for ever thinking that in the first place. Also, I did find it funny that at the end, the film starts with a particular song and it's being sung by a woman, and then at the end, it's being sung by a man in the form of Elton John. So women are being replaced by men during the end credits as well. So, bloody men.
I did think the song reminded me a little bit of sort of Wicker Man vibes, a song at sort of the end, that kind of
Gentle Johnny.
Yeah, Gentle Johnny, very quite relaxing sort of theme. I was like, oh yeah, I'm definitely getting that early folk horror vibe from this song choice.
Yeah, no, it almost has that kind of it shouldn't really fit with what was going on. It's like a lot of the Asian horror movies, which end on a horrible, horrible note, but then have this sort of either upbeat, sort of poppy or romantic ballad song over the end credits. So, yeah, no, I think that these are just two opinions of two white men. I'm sure that many of you out there have your own opinions on what happened in Men. So, hey, let us know on social media at Join Nerd Party, or at DallasKing1138, or at Lee Hutchison _ I think is it just now?
Correct.
Yes. So yeah, let us know what you thought of Men. And in terms of the next episode, what have we got coming up? We're waiting on something coming out in America, I'm presuming.
Yes, we have that. There's still Euphoria season 2 to talk about. We have a bunch of interviews that I really need to edit. So yeah, we will have stuff coming out soon. We'll continue to trickle along.
Yeah, will we do an entire episode on the entire series of Euphoria season 2, or should we just do a big episode on that incredible episode around the play at the school, which must have taken up the entire school budget and taken it away from other stuff. The production and design on that thing was immense. So yes, no, I think we definitely do have to talk about that.
And we're going to get a box office episode hopefully recorded this month as well, with a previous guest, with now Everything Everywhere All at Once hitting the top of the A24 pile. Seems like a good chance to kind of reflect on the box office and how it all kind of works, I guess.
Yeah, and obviously in August, it's going to be the 10th anniversary of A24, so we need to think of a couple of things to mark that special occasion. I'm sure A24 will release a birthday candle, but if there's anything in particular that you'd like to see us cover in that point, sure, just drop us a message and let us know. Until then, men.